The streets of Guatemala City were alive with the restless pulse of change. The air smelled of smoke and damp earth, a mixture of burned fuel from distant protests, and the heavy scent of rain-soaked cobblestones. Ernesto Guevara walked cautiously along the narrow streets, his journal tucked under his arm, eyes scanning the faces of the city. Each passerby seemed to carry a story of struggle, each glance a silent testament to the simmering unrest that had gripped the nation. He had arrived just days before, hungry for knowledge, eager to witness the political turmoil that had drawn international attention. But what he did not expect was to meet a woman who would change everything, not just his journey, but the very contours of his heart. Hilda Gadea moved through the square with purposeful strides, her dark hair pinned neatly back, her sharp eyes observing the crowd with an intensity that betrayed her inner fire. She was an economist, a revolutionary at heart, and someone who refused to remain silent while injustice festered around her. The rallies and gatherings were her battlegrounds, though her weapons were words and ideas rather than rifles. She spoke to the people not with slogans, but with the language of reason and hope, challenging them to think, to question, to act. Ernesto first noticed her at a small gathering in a university hall. The space was cramped, filled with the fervent voices of students and activists debating the future of Latin America. Hilda stood at the front, a figure of quiet authority, articulating a vision of social justice and economic reform with a passion that lit up the room. Her eyes, dark and intelligent, scanned the audience and landed briefly on him. There was a moment almost imperceptible where their gaze met, and, in that instant, something unspoken passed between them. After the session ended, attendees lingered to discuss ideas, to shake hands and offer their thoughts. Ernesto approached cautiously, his heart quickened not by fear, but by curiosity. "I was impressed by your analysis," he said, his voice steady despite the sudden rush of nerves. "Your understanding of economic structures, it's extraordinary." Hilda studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable, as if weighing whether he was sincere or merely another idealistic observer. "And you are?" she asked, her tone polite but edged with caution. "Ernesto Guevara," he replied. "I've come to understand this country, its struggles. I've traveled to see, to learn, and perhaps to help in whatever way I can." Her lips curved into a faint smile, sharp yet warm. "Many come with that intent," she said. "Few understand what it truly means to fight, not with guns, but with ideas, with conviction." There was a flicker in Ernesto's eyes, a spark of recognition. She was not a woman to be intimidated, and her intellect challenged him in ways he had never anticipated. Over the following days, they found themselves thrown together at meetings, discussions, and rallies. Each encounter built an invisible thread between them, fragile, delicate, yet undeniable. Hilda introduced Ernesto to her circle of activists, economists, and thinkers. She spoke of the United Fruit Company's exploitations, of government corruption, of the need for organized resistance. Ernesto listened intently, asking questions, challenging assumptions, yet always with a reverence that made Hilda respect him in return. He was not just a foreigner fascinated by revolution. He was someone whose ideals could align with hers, someone who could, perhaps, be a partner in both thought and spirit. Evenings were spent in the dim light of cafes, where they shared arguments and laughter in equal measure. Hilda would talk about the injustices she had witnessed, the lives destroyed by greed and oppression, and Ernesto would respond with stories of distant countries, of people living on the margins, of his own dreams for a world where equality was not just an ideal. The conversations were intense, sometimes heated, yet under them flowed an undercurrent of something more tender, a curiosity, a longing, a recognition of kindred spirits. But beneath the growing intimacy, a tension simmered. The world outside was not forgiving. Military crackdowns, surveillance, political betrayals. These were not abstract threats, but realities that could and would tear lives apart. Hilda was painfully aware that someone like Ernesto, passionate and idealistic, could be consumed by the very revolution they both sought to nurture. Could love survive in a world so violently fractured? Could a heart devoted to justice still find space to nurture affection? One evening, As rain pattered against the window pane of a small cafe, Ernesto watched Hilda speak to a group of young activists. Her eyes sparkled with conviction, her gestures precise and deliberate. There was a light in her that seemed impervious to fear, a courage he had rarely seen. And yet, in that same moment, he glimpsed a shadow of worry, of vulnerability she tried to hide behind her words. After the meeting, they walked together through the wet streets, the night alive with distant chants and the smell of rain. "You see so much," Ernesto said softly, breaking a silence that had stretched comfortably between them. "Sometimes I wonder how you bear it all, the weight of the world on your shoulders." Hilda laughed lightly, a sound that carried both amusement and sorrow. "We bear it because we must," she said. "Because if we do not, who will?" But her voice faltered slightly, just enough for him to notice. "Sometimes it feels unbearably lonely." Ernesto reached out, his hand brushing hers for the briefest of moments. There was no declaration, no grand gesture, only a shared understanding. In that fleeting touch, something fragile and profound passed between them, an acknowledgement of connection, of attraction, of possibility. And so, in the turbulent heart of Guatemala, amidst the clash of ideals and the stirrings of revolution, Ernesto and Hilda's paths intertwined. Their story had begun, not with certainty, not with comfort, but with the spark of intellect, the allure of shared purpose, and the quiet recognition that in each other they had found something dangerous, something beautiful, a love that could inspire, and perhaps a love that could challenge the very revolution they sought to embrace. The weeks that followed their first meeting passed like a storm surging over the mountains, intense, unpredictable, and impossible to ignore. Ernesto and Hilda found themselves drawn into each other's worlds with a force that neither had anticipated. Their conversations, once formal and cautious, now meandered into long discussions over coffee-stained tables, in quiet park corners, or beneath the flickering lamps of late-night cafes. Every word, every argument, every shared laugh seemed to draw them closer, weaving a fragile bond amidst the chaos that surrounded them. Hilda introduced Ernesto to the intricacies of her work with the economy of Guatemala, a system rigged to serve foreign corporations at the expense of the people. She spoke passionately about the exploitation, the corruption, the inequities that left entire communities in hunger and despair. Her words were precise, yet tinged with the raw emotion of someone who had witnessed suffering firsthand. "You must understand, Ernesto," she said one evening as they walked along the riverbank, the water reflecting the dim city lights. "Revolution isn't about heroics or speeches. It's about understanding the system so thoroughly that you can dismantle it piece by piece. And that is no easy task." Ernesto listened, captivated not just by the ideas, but by the intensity in her voice, the fire in her eyes. "You make it sound beautiful," he said softly. "The way you see the world, the way you fight for it, it's inspiring." Hilda's lips curved into a small, almost shy smile. "Beautiful? Perhaps. But dangerous too. Too many people fall in love with the idea of change, without understanding the cost. And yet, the cost of their growing attachment remained invisible to them, overshadowed by the magnetic pull of intellect and passion. Each day, their bond deepened. They debated, disagreed, and then laughed at the stubbornness that mirrored in each other. Their discussions ranged from Marxist theory to the ethics of revolutionary action, but always returned to a shared longing, the hope for a world more just, more humane, more equal. One night, Hilda took Ernesto to a small gathering of fellow activists, a circle of minds dedicated to change. She spoke of her dreams for Latin America, with a conviction that left Ernesto awestruck. After the meeting, as the group filtered out, Ernesto turned to her, his voice barely above a whisper. "You shape people," he said, without even trying. You make them believe that change is possible." Hilda looked at him, and for a moment, the weight of her burdens seemed to slip away. "We make each other stronger," she replied. "Even you, Ernesto, you see the world not just as it is, but as it could be." It was in these moments, between whispered conversations and shared convictions, that their relationship began to take on a form that neither of them could ignore. There was intimacy in their shared ideals, in the understanding that their hearts beat not only for each other, but for something greater. And yet, the tension between personal desire and revolutionary duty simmered quietly beneath the surface. Ernesto's eyes often lingered on Hilda when she was lost in thought, scribbling notes or passionately debating with colleagues. He admired her brilliance, her courage, her unyielding commitment to justice. And Hilda, in turn, saw in Ernesto a kindred spirit, a man who shared her ideals but approached them with a blend of youthful curiosity and daring courage. Their connection was both intellectual and emotional, a rare harmony in a world full of discord. Yet, with every passing day, the shadow of uncertainty grew. Hilda could sense that Ernesto's restless spirit, his hunger for action, might one day pull him away from her. She tried to silence the gnawing fear in her chest, convincing herself that love could coexist with revolution. But in the quiet moments, alone in their favorite cafe or walking beneath the lamplights, she allowed herself the luxury of doubt. One evening, as rain drummed softly against the windows of the cafe, Ernesto reached across the table, his hand brushing hers. The touch was electric, sending warmth spiraling through both of them. "Hilda," he said quietly, "I feel something for you, something I cannot ignore." Hilda's heart skipped a beat. She wanted to speak, to tell him that she felt it too, that every thought of him stirred longing and hope. And yet, caution held her back. "Ernesto," she said softly, "feelings they are powerful. But we must be careful. The world we live in, it does not forgive weakness." He nodded, understanding the unspoken warning, but neither of them could resist the quiet magnetism that drew them together. They walked home that night through the wet, lamplit streets, side by side, yet not touching, hearts racing with unspoken desire. Their silences were charged, their glances lingering longer than politeness allowed. As the weeks turned into months, they continued to grow closer, even as the weight of responsibility pressed down upon them. Hilda shared her private fears, her doubts, and Ernesto listened, offering the comfort of understanding and the thrill of shared ambition. Together, they dreamed of a world transformed, and in that shared vision, they found a love that was as much about ideals as it was about intimacy. But with every step forward, the shadow of inevitability loomed. The revolution demanded sacrifices, and Hilda sensed that their love, no matter how pure or intense, might be one of them. The tension between heart and cause was palpable, a silent question that neither dared to answer. Could they truly have both love and revolution, or would one inevitably consume the other? In those moments, under the humid Guatemalan night sky, they both understood that they were dancing on the edge of a precipice, where passion, intellect, and duty collided. And neither knew, not yet, which would triumph, the fire of their hearts or the call of the revolution. The humid air of Guatemala City carried a weight heavier than the summer heat, a tension that clung to every street corner, every quiet alleyway, and every whispered conversation. Ernesto had grown restless. The revolution, once a distant dream he had only observed from afar, now called to him with insistent urgency. Hilda, ever aware of the forces swirling around them, noticed a change in him, a sharper edge to his voice, a fevered intensity in his eyes. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the city in bruised shades of orange and purple, Ernesto visited Hilda in her modest apartment. The room smelled faintly of books, paper, and the lingering scent of jasmine from the small garden below her window. She looked up from the stack of reports she had been reviewing, and for a moment, their eyes met with the comfort of routine intimacy. "Ernesto," she said softly, "you've been distant lately. What's on your mind?" He hesitated, his hands trembling slightly as he removed his jacket. "Hilda, I cannot stay here any longer. I feel the call of the revolution. I have to leave Guatemala soon. There are other places, other struggles that need me." Hilda's heart clenched, a sharp, unbearable ache spreading through her chest. She had always known that the revolution came first in Ernesto's life, but hearing it spoken aloud made the truth impossible to deny. "Leave?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the soft hum of the city below. "But what about us?" Ernesto moved closer, taking her hands in his. His touch was warm, familiar, but it carried the weight of inevitability. Hilda, my love, you know I care for you, more than I can put into words. But this is something I cannot ignore. The people, the injustice, it's calling me. You've taught me to see the world clearly, to feel its pain. I cannot turn away. Tears welled in Hilda's eyes, blurring the lines of her usually sharp features. She had imagined this moment, feared it, even prayed it would not come, and yet here it was, an unavoidable fracture between heart and duty. I understand, she said, her voice trembling. You must follow your path. But it will break me to let you go. Ernesto pressed his forehead against hers, a silent plea for understanding, a shared acknowledgement of the agony of choice. It breaks me too, he admitted, voice low, raw. Every step I take away from you feels like a betrayal, but I cannot betray the people, the cause we believe in. In the days that followed, their apartment became a fragile cocoon of fleeting intimacy and quiet sorrow. They spoke in whispers, lingered in touches that spoke more than words, and shared moments of laughter that felt both joyous and unbearably temporary. Each kiss was tinged with desperation, each embrace a silent acknowledgement that their time together was dwindling. Hilda tried to immerse herself in her own work, throwing herself into research and political activism. She knew that to dwell on the impending separation would be to invite despair, and despair could be crippling. Yet every morning, she would find herself glancing at the empty chair where Ernesto had once sat, imagining his voice, his laughter, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. For Ernesto, the decision to leave was a torment of conflicting emotions. Every step he took toward action felt right, necessary, almost sacred, but it also carried the weight of guilt. Leaving Hilda was like leaving a part of himself behind, a tether that pulled at his soul even as his mind urged him forward. Their final night together before his departure was a silent, tender battle against the inevitable. They sat on the balcony, the city lights flickering like a constellation of fleeting dreams. The warm air was thick with a scent of rain yet to fall, and the quiet hum of distant protests underscored the impossibility of their love. Hilda, Ernesto whispered, taking her hands in his, this is not goodbye in the way you think. Our hearts, they will carry each other, even across oceans and battles. You've changed me, taught me to see the world more clearly, and for that, I will always be grateful. Hilda swallowed hard, tears slipping down her cheeks. And you've taught me to dream bigger, Ernesto, to believe that even in darkness, change is possible. But I cannot follow you. My path, my responsibility lies here, in the work I must continue. They held each other close, a desperate attempt to memorize the warmth, the scent, the weight of presence. Every heartbeat was a testament to the love they would not abandon, yet could not fully embrace. And when the dawn came, pale and hesitant, Ernesto slipped away into the world, leaving Hilda with the echo of his footsteps and the promise that love could survive even sacrifice. In the silence he left behind, Hilda felt the sharp sting of loss, tempered only by the pride that the man she loved would pursue his ideals without compromise. She poured herself into her work with renewed fervor, each economic report, each political speech, a tribute to the connection they shared and the revolution they both served. And yet, in the quiet moments, when the city slept and the streets were empty, Hilda allowed herself to remember the warmth of his hand, the intensity of his gaze, and the fleeting promise of a love that had been profound, passionate, and impossible. It was in those memories that she found strength, knowing that their love had not been wasted, only transformed into a quiet, enduring force that would guide them both in ways neither could have anticipated. The months after Ernesto's departure were a test of endurance, patience, and faith, qualities Hilda had once reserved only for her work, now demanded of her heart. Guatemala was a city simmering with unrest, and Hilda, already entwined in political activism, found herself at the center of a storm she could neither avoid nor control. Each day brought whispers of coups, surveillance by government agents, and the ever-present shadow of danger. And always in the back of her mind was Ernesto, distant yet omnipresent, his ideals and ambition woven into the fabric of her thoughts. Letters from him arrived sporadically, each one a lifeline, each one a reminder of the distance between them. They were filled with revolutionary fervor, accounts of uprisings, and philosophical musings on the world's injustices. But the letters carried more than information. They carried emotion, restrained by necessity. Ernesto's words were careful, sometimes clipped, always precise. But in the spaces between sentences, Hilda read the longing, the quiet ache of separation. Yet, as the months turned into a year, rumors began to creep into her consciousness. Whispers of Ernesto traveling with new revolutionary circles, of alliances formed in distant countries, and, most painful of all, of letters intercepted or unanswered. Each fragment of information, no matter how small or vague, planted seeds of doubt in Hilda's heart. She tried to temper them with reason. The world they lived in was perilous, communication was imperfect, and trust was a delicate, necessary tool for survival. Despite the uncertainty, Hilda herself became more deeply involved in revolutionary circles. She organized meetings, wrote essays, and provided economic guidance to those who would challenge oppression. Her reputation as a thinker and activist grew. Yet with it came scrutiny. Government agents, suspicious colleagues, and even jealous peers watched her every move. The tension was relentless, and in the quiet hours of the night, she would often sit alone, wondering if her devotion to both love and cause would cost her more than she could bear. One evening, a particularly harsh letter arrived from Ernesto. It was short, businesslike, and omitted the warmth that usually threaded his writing. He spoke of challenges in his latest assignments, of betrayals by comrades, and of the growing dangers he faced. There was no mention of love, no reassurance, no tender words to anchor her heart. Hilda read the letter repeatedly, searching between the lines, trying to find the man she knew, the connection they had shared. But each reading left her more unsettled, more fearful that perhaps their bond could not survive the strain of ideology and distance. Her doubts culminated one night when a fellow activist, a man whose motives were always ambiguous, hinted that Ernesto might be aligning himself with factions whose methods Hilda could not endorse. He writes of justice, the man said cautiously, but some of the people he works with, they do not care who suffers in the process. Hilda felt a cold, sharp pain twist in her chest. She wanted to defend Ernesto, to reject the insinuation outright, but the seed of doubt had taken root. Could the man she loved, the man who had inspired her and taught her to dream, truly be walking a path that betrayed their shared values? Was her heart blinded by affection, or had loyalty become a dangerous illusion? That night she could not sleep. She sat at her desk, pen trembling in hand, drafting letters she would never send, pouring out her longing, her fear, and the quiet rage that came from feeling powerless. "If only you were here," she wrote in her mind. "If only the world allowed us to be together without the weight of history pressing down upon us." But the revolution was relentless and the world unforgiving. When Ernesto finally returned briefly to Guatemala, the reunion was both tender and tense. He appeared changed, hardened by struggle, more resolute, but also distant in ways Hilda had never imagined. They walked together through the city, their hands brushing occasionally, but the silence between them spoke louder than words. Hilda wanted to demand explanations, to force him to bridge the chasm that had grown between them. Yet she held back, sensing that confrontation could shatter what little intimacy remained. Instead, they spoke carefully, measuredly, exchanging accounts of their respective struggles. Each word, though polite and composed, carried unspoken accusations and fragile defenses. Hilda caught glimpses of the man she loved, brief smiles, a flicker of tenderness, but also glimpses of the revolutionary who had changed, perhaps irreversibly. She felt both pride and fear. Pride that he remained committed to justice, fear that in the process, the man she loved might be lost forever. The tension between love and ideology came to a head one evening in her apartment. They were alone, the air heavy with unsaid words. Hilda finally voiced the question that had haunted her for months. "Ernesto, do you still believe in what we once shared? Or has the revolution changed you beyond recognition?" Ernesto paused, eyes clouded with fatigue and longing. "Hilda, the revolution does not change who I am, but it shapes what I must do. Our love, it exists, it always will. But I cannot let it dictate my choices. There are people counting on me, lives depending on me. I must act, even if it takes me further from you than I ever wanted." Hilda's heart ached at the truth, bitter and undeniable. She wanted to scream, to beg him to choose her, to step away from the cause that had claimed him. But she also understood, intellectually, painfully, that to demand such a thing would be to betray the very ideals that had drawn them together. They were bound by love, yes, but also by a commitment that transcended personal desire. That night, as Ernesto left her apartment, the silence between them was a language of sorrow and understanding. Hilda watched him disappear into the darkness, a figure caught between love and duty, hope and despair. She knew, with a certainty that terrified her, that their bond would never be simple again. Trust would be tested, hearts would waver, and the line between devotion and betrayal would blur under the weight of revolution. In the days that followed, Hilda immersed herself in work once more, striving to reclaim a sense of control over a world that seemed determined to test her limits. Yet in every quiet moment, in the pause between tasks, in the fleeting hush of night, she felt the ache of absence and the tension of loyalty. The question lingered, haunting and unresolved. Could love survive when every choice demanded sacrifice, when ideology and passion collided with merciless intensity? The city was quiet that evening, but the stillness was deceptive. Hilda could feel the weight of it pressing down on her chest as she waited, heart pounding with anticipation and fear. Ernesto's return was brief, and she knew this meeting could determine the future of everything they had shared, the love that had grown amidst the chaos, the ideals that had bound them together, and the choices that would define their lives. When he arrived, there was a difference in him that she could not immediately name. His eyes were sharper, more resolute, but also shadowed with exhaustion and unspoken longing. He carried with him the aura of battles fought, victories won and lost, and the heavy burden of responsibilities that neither of them could escape. "Hilda," he said softly, stepping into her modest apartment, "thank you for seeing me. I know the world keeps moving, even when I am gone." She looked at him, her emotions roiling, love, fear, pride, and sorrow all intertwined. "Ernesto," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I've waited, but not knowing it's almost unbearable." He crossed the room slowly, his presence filling the space between them. "I never stopped thinking about you," he admitted, his voice raw with honesty. "Every decision I've made, every step I've taken in the revolution, it's been with the memory of you, with the hope that what we started between us is not lost." Hilda reached out, trembling, and took his hand. The connection, though familiar, was charged with tension. She wanted to pull him close, to let the warmth of their past embrace her like a shield. But she also knew the weight of reality. "Ernesto, we cannot live only in memories. We cannot let the love we share blind us to what must be done. The world, it demands sacrifices." He nodded, the shadow of a sad smile crossing his face. "I know. And that is why I cannot ask you to follow me, not yet. I cannot ask you to abandon your work, your life here, your principles. But leaving you behind, it is a wound I carry every day." The room was silent, the only sound the faint hum of the city beyond the windows. Hilda's heart ached at the quiet desperation in his words. She could see the conflict etched into his features, the battle between heart and cause, between personal desire and the demands of history. She realized in that moment that this was not a choice they could make together. It was a choice that each had to accept individually. "Ernesto," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands, "we are at a crossroads. We cannot have everything. We cannot have both love and the revolution in full measure. You know what you must do, and I know what I must do." His eyes searched hers, and for a fleeting second, they allowed themselves the luxury of imagining another life, one where they could remain together without the constant shadow of struggle. But reality intruded relentlessly, a reminder that ideals and love were rarely compatible in their purest forms. "I choose the revolution," Ernesto said finally, his voice quiet but unwavering. "I have no choice, Hilda. My path is clear, even if it takes me away from you. The people, the struggle, they need me. And I need to remain true to what we believe in." Hilda's chest tightened, but she forced herself to breathe. "And I choose to continue my work here. To fight in my own way, in the only way I can. That is my path. And it is not a lesser choice. It is just separate from yours." They embraced then, a long, lingering hug that spoke of love and understanding, of sorrow and courage. It was a farewell, though neither of them called it that. They held on to each other not with desperation, but with the quiet acknowledgement of shared history and enduring respect. In that moment, love was not lost. It was transformed into a guiding force, subtle but enduring, that would shape their choices and their commitment to their ideals. As Ernesto prepared to leave, Hilda whispered, "Go with courage and remember us." He pressed a soft kiss to her forehead, a promise without words, and stepped into the night. The streets of Guatemala seemed colder, emptier without him, yet in her chest burned a quiet fire. The flame of love intertwined with purpose, a flame that would endure even in separation. In the weeks that followed, Hilda threw herself into her work with renewed determination. Every economic report, every political strategy, every conversation with young activists became a tribute to the love and lessons she had shared with Ernesto. And though the ache of absence remained, she carried with her the knowledge that love, when intertwined with conviction and sacrifice, did not vanish, it evolved. Ernesto, for his part, carried Hilda's influence into every corner of his revolutionary journey. Her intellect, her courage, and her unwavering belief in justice guided him as much as any ideology. And in the quiet moments before battle or strategy meetings, he would remember the warmth of her hand, the sharp brilliance of her mind, and the deep, unspoken understanding that had defined their love. The choice between love and revolution had been made, not in defiance, not in sorrow, but in recognition of a truth both had known all along, that some bonds are strengthened not by proximity, but by shared ideals, by the courage to sacrifice, and by the quiet, enduring knowledge that love can persist even when hearts must walk separate paths. And so in the heart of turbulent Guatemala, two souls parted physically but remained connected in ways deeper than presence or touch, connected by memory, by principle, and by the understanding that sometimes love is not the comfort of being together, but the courage to let the other pursue their destiny. Years had passed since Ernesto had walked away from Hilda's apartment, leaving behind a trail of unspoken words and quiet longing. The revolution had taken him across continents, through jungles and cities, victories and defeats, shaping him into a man whose name would one day echo far beyond the borders of Latin America. Hilda, meanwhile, remained in Guatemala, carving a path of influence through her intellect and commitment to justice. Though physically apart, the imprint of their shared time remained, subtle but enduring, like the faint afterglow of a sunset long after it has disappeared below the horizon. Hilda often reflected on those early days, the moments of laughter in cafes, the stolen walks beneath street lamps, the heated debates that stretched late into the night. She remembered the spark in Ernesto's eyes when he first began to speak of revolution, the intensity of his conviction, and the way he had challenged her to see the world not just as it was, but as it could be. Their love, though tested by distance and circumstance, had shaped her in ways she could not ignore. She thought about the letters, some unanswered, some carried for miles before reaching her hands, each one a fragment of his world and a bridge to her heart. They had both lived with the ache of absence, the weight of impossible choices, and the constant reminder that the world demanded sacrifices far greater than their own desires. Yet through it all, Hilda felt a quiet satisfaction. They had remained true, not just to each other, but to the ideals that had drawn them together in the first place. In the evenings, after long days of political meetings and research, Hilda would sometimes sit by the window, gazing at the distant horizon and allowing herself a rare indulgence, replaying memories of Ernesto, of the conversations and moments that had left indelible marks on her heart. She realized that love did not always require presence, that absence could preserve its purity, and that sometimes the greatest expression of devotion was the courage to let the other follow their destiny, even at the cost of shared intimacy. For Ernesto, the memory of Hilda was never far. Across jungles and cities, in moments of exhaustion and quiet reflection, he would recall her sharp mind, her fearless heart, and the way she had opened his eyes to a deeper understanding of the world. Every plan, every strategy, every revolutionary act carried echoes of their time together. She had influenced not just his heart, but his mind and soul, leaving a legacy that guided him in ways no ideology alone could have achieved. Though their paths diverged, the lessons they shared endured. Ernesto's ideals were tempered by the compassion Hilda had instilled in him, the necessity of understanding the human cost of revolution. Hilda's work, likewise, bore the imprint of their bond, a commitment to change that was as much about intellectual rigor as it was about empathy and justice. In many ways, their love had transcended the boundaries of romance, evolving into a partnership of principles, a shared vision etched across time and distance. And yet, the human heart is rarely content with abstraction alone. Hilda sometimes allowed herself a bittersweet smile when thinking of what might have been, the life they could have shared without the demands of revolution, the quiet domesticity that their love could never fully enjoy. But even in longing, she felt no bitterness, only gratitude, for the passion that had inspired her, for the courage that had challenged her, and for the enduring bond that neither time nor distance could erase. History, as it often does, moved relentlessly forward. Names were written, battles fought, and causes championed. But within that vast impersonal current, the private story of Hilda and Ernesto remained, a quiet testament to the power of love intertwined with conviction, of hearts shaped and strengthened by the demands of ideals. Their relationship had not been easy, nor had it been conventional, but it had been profound, passionate, and transformative. In her later years, Hilda often spoke to young activists and economists, recounting the lessons of her life. She spoke of courage, sacrifice, and the necessity of staying true to one's principles. But she also spoke, subtly, of the love that had shaped her journey. A love that was not diminished by absence, that had survived distance and struggle, and that had left an enduring mark on both hearts and histories. Ernesto, in his memoirs and recollections shared with comrades and allies, would occasionally mention a woman who had taught him the meaning of integrity, the necessity of compassion, and the quiet, transformative power of connection. He never named her explicitly in public accounts, but to those who knew the depth of his journey, the influence was unmistakable. Hilda's presence had been a guiding star, a moral compass, and a source of inspiration that no battlefield, no city, no revolutionary campaign could ever erase. In the end, their love was not a story of possession or proximity, but of enduring impact. It was a love that had demanded sacrifice, that had tested the limits of heart and conscience, and that had emerged transformed into something more lasting than romance alone, a legacy of shared ideals of courage and of unwavering commitment to a world larger than themselves. As Hilda gazed at the horizon one last time before dusk fell, she felt a quiet, serene understanding. Love, she realized, is not always measured by the time spent together, but by the depth of influence and the courage to let it shape lives beyond the self. And in that truth, she found solace, pride, and a profound, unshakable peace.